All right, hello everybody, and welcome to this Rewire guide to anxiety. So, if you're new to this series, this is just a series of videos I'm making based on some of the symptoms people present themselves with when they come to work with me. And I've kind of done it because when people are thinking about booking in a session, working with me in some way or another. Very often, we have a brief chat beforehand to find out what they're going through or what questions they have about my process. And what I've found over the years is that a lot of the times there's a whole lot of crossover. Anyone who's dealing with one specific problem in their life is usually going through a whole lot of things that are the same as a lot of other people. And when it comes to something like anxiety, my process for dealing with it, while it's going to be, tailored and individual to the person, often there's a lot of similarities in the things that we work through and deal with just based on the nature of that condition itself. So, today, as mentioned, we're going to be talking about anxiety, specifically persistent anxiety. So, like anxiety that seems to come back, it kind of shows up again and again and again in the same way, even if the reason that we can see that we might be having anxiety is different all the time, or what's actually quite a bit more common is that we can't figure out the reason at all that we're experiencing this anxiety. Very often, sometimes anxiety feels like it's easy. It's like a psychological emotion that you could work through a therapist, talk through what kind of thoughts you're dealing with, and they can you know work back through your life and figure out what kind of patterns are leading to this. Or if you have like a specific relationship, financial problem, etc., that's causing you to panic, the answer to solving that can be pretty obvious. However, more often than not, anxiety seems to brew itself up when we can't actually find a really logical reason or solution to sorting it out. And today I'm going to try and propose three different things that come up almost all the time. So I'm not saying this is specifically going to get rid of your anxiety for good. There's a lot of finer details that you might need to pick through. But when it comes to the physical side of things, there are certain things that show up again and again and again. So, yeah, let's get into it. And the first thing is, I guess, to point out the fact that anxiety, while we think of it as an emotion and we think of it as this kind of like psychological thing in our head, and maybe in our sort of gut, um, anxiety really is one of the emotions that has a much stronger kind of physical connection than anything else, really. Like, if I was to give you a reason as to why do we experience anxiety, the simplest answer I could give is you experience the emotion of anxiety when the brain wants you to spring into action. And unfortunately, the nature of emotions means that the brain can't actually be a whole lot more specific than that. So we think it'd be really useful if our emotions could actually tell us exactly what's wrong and exactly what it needs us to do. But how evolution works, basically, it's just not that simple. When we experience anxiety, we are being given like a general vibe of things by the brain to say, hey, this is a direction that you might want to consider going down. The same with, happiness, sadness, all those different things, is the brain is just trying to give you like a certain vibe or flavor of things to convince you what type of next steps you might want to take. And with anxiety, the conclusion, I guess, that the brain has come to is that you need to be moving. Movement is the task you want to be engaged in, and you've got to basically figure out the problem yourself. But it knows that the answer is something urgently right now requires action. So when we break it down into that, again, sometimes it becomes a little bit easier to figure out like an external stimulus that might be causing this anxiety. If you think of like, is there anything that I might need to be acting on now? Or if you go down the talking therapy route, usually you find like there's some things that you've been avoiding and, keeping away that need your urgent attention that you're just not addressing. And when these things are coming from the external environment, um, a lot of the time it can be a lot easier to figure out exactly what's going on, exactly what course of action you might need to take. But when the problems and issues are coming from the internal, so from your own body, that can be a lot harder. And that's what I want to do is talk about three concepts from the internal body, the internal state, and what types of exercise or what types of action you might be able to take that might alleviate these symptoms. So the first concept that can cause a lot of anxiety is around a part of the brain called the vestibular system. And the vestibular system is basically, if you imagine like little spirit levels that sit inside your ears, that basically tell you one, which way up you are, two, if you're moving, and three, if you are moving, how fast are you going? Which way are you going? Up, down, forwards, backwards? Are you spinning left, right, diagonals? All of that good stuff. When your body's experiencing anxiety and your brain's asking you to move around, sometimes the reason is not that there is something outside your body that is requiring your urgent attention, but actually that the vestibular system, the like little balance system inside your body, is not functioning uh, at a very high level. Okay. When one region of your brain is not being used to the extent your brain would like it to be, it often demands, it tries to figure out what it can do to get you to start using that part of the body. Okay. You'll see this a lot with people if they have like muscle twitches. Very often that's like a neuron is kind of dying in the brain. And so the brain starts trying to urgently contract a certain muscle to get it to move, to wake it back up. Or if you see sometimes when people close their eyes, you cover over your eyes and your eyes want more stimulation than they're currently getting, and you start to hallucinate lots of little colors and patterns and shapes and things like that. Or even with like your sensory system, if you're starved of touch in one area, sometimes you might find that it starts to itch or cramp, or something. Your brain gives you a sensation there to tell you, hey, I want you to pay attention to this and wake it up. Now, that's going to be important for the first two concepts. So we'll touch on that again in a little bit. But when we think about the vestibular system itself, the vestibular system's whole job is figuring out movement. And so if you're not activating your vestibular system, if you're not giving your vestibular system the right amount of movement that it desires, in order for it to be able to, function correctly, because obviously the brain really cares about not falling over and staying upright. Well, your brain is going to start saying, hey, you know what? I'd really like these vestibular canals to be activated a lot more than they currently are. And what is a good way to get you moving your head a lot more? Well, the answer is going to be movement. So, in a way, one of the strongest contributors, said that word really badly, one of the strongest contributors to anxiety actually has nothing to do with your external environment at all. It's just the body saying, hey, you're not moving enough. And because you're not moving enough, the vestibular inner ear apparatus isn't getting enough information to keep our chances of survival at a high enough level. And with that in mind, one of the best things that you can do for anxiety simply just becomes movement and exercise. That's actually true for all three concepts. So we'll talk about like different types of movement, different types of exercise. But in the first category, the first thing I would always want to know if somebody's dealing with anxiety is how is your balance? So if you are really all over the place with your balance and I'm more interested in what your balance is like with your eyes closed than I am open. That's going to give me quite a bit of information about the physical state of your body, and that maybe your body is actually just demanding more sensory input to these vestibular organs. Okay. And it seems when we look into like research and stuff, there's a lot of cases where, reduced vestibular function or vestibular conditions are linked with a higher rate of anxiety. And what I've seen when I work with people with anxiety, when we improve balance, very often we see the intensity of the anxiety reduces, even if that isn't necessarily what the problem is that's going on. Um, that's going to basically do two things. It's going to train up the vestibular system to function better. So it's getting more accurate sensory input. It's also going to reduce our risk of falling, which gives our brain one less thing to be kind of worried or anxious about. So another part of the reason why the vestibular system I'm going to highlight as like the key area that we want to work when it comes to anxiety is that if your brain thinks that you have the potential to fall over, that's basically game over for you. Like if you hit your head off the floor, there's not a whole lot of recovery from that. And so your brain is going to do anything and everything it can to get you to be physically active more, physically moving more, and especially working on your ability to balance and stay upright. So when we want to see anxiety reduce, balance training is going to be the top form of training I'm going to recommend. Now, it can just be as simple as standing on one leg, but if we want to see improvements to the vestibular system, we want to not just practice that kind of like staying still balancing. We want to practice balancing where our head is moving, balancing where our eyes are moving, balancing where both of them are moving, or even the opposite. So keep the head and the eyes super still and move everything else around it. So two different types of balance training that can work really, really well. And as I said, when I assess people, usually it's going to be looking at what's going on when your eyes are closed. That's going to be a huge key component to it as well. Can you actually train your balance so that you're comfortable when your visual system, which is a much stronger, more powerful system to help you stay upright, is switched off or otherwise engaged. Now, if you're interested in balance training, rather than even doing a full session with me, we've actually developed a tool. This is the Neuroband. It's a wearable vision and balance training tool. And this is probably the ultimate kind of starter thing I would recommend. We didn't build it specifically for anxiety, but anytime I've worked with somebody with anxiety as one of their kind of big symptoms that they're dealing with, uh, all the time, this is the top thing I'm recommending. It doesn't necessarily require that we do lots and lots of specific work. Sometimes actually just improving the balance is the best first step that you can take. So that's the first course of action we can take. Number two is a little bit similar, but now we're going to extend the branches quite a bit wider. So we've said the reason that we want to train our balance is that the brain is asking for more sensory input. It's asking for more information from the vestibular or balance system. Well, the same can actually be true for any of the other senses in our body. Okay, so when we are dealing with one sense that is understimulated and the brain wants more information from that area, there's a very good chance that anxiety is an emotion, sorry, that will kick us into action. The more we're moving, the more we're kind of navigating through the world, the more likely it is we're going to stumble across the answers to whatever sensory problems and sensory issues that we're dealing with. But even more relevant is something called sensory mismatch. So your senses all pick up different pieces of information about the world. And when they arrive in your brain has to join them all together to kind of build the full picture of what everything looks like. Okay, so your eyes take in all the visual information, your vestibular system takes in all the balance information, your touch receptors. You've got loads of different types of receptors for touch that are going to figure out like your body in space. So, like where you are, how your muscles and joints are all stacked on top of each other. Is there anything close to you on the outside, or different temperatures or vibrations or anything like that? You've also got smell and taste for dealing with chemicals in different manners, and a whole load of other things that are going to deal with like temperature regulation on the inside and blood pressure and heart rate and all of those fancy things. Anytime two of those systems disagree, that is going to make it much harder for the brain to build this big picture of what is going on in reality. Okay, so like we never actually get like a 100% accurate view of what the world looks like. We get our brain's best guess based on all of the information that the different senses, internal and external, of our body present to us. And that's super important because if two things or more than two things disagree quite a lot, then the brain has to start ignoring some information, or it's got to start like choosing a favorite. So very often, the reason I said I want to see what your balance is like with your eyes closed is if your eyes say that you are moving and your inner ear says that you're not, or the other way around, your brain is more likely to vote in favor of what the eyes are saying. There's more brain cells devoted to vision and eye movement than there are for balance. So the brain says, all right, well, these two things don't match. I better choose whose side I'm going to pick. And they choose the side of vision. Um, Anytime that we have some kind of sensory mismatch, it's very likely that we're going to find issues with the brain's ability to see the world properly. And what it's going to then do is ask you for more information. It says the amount of information I've got right now isn't enough to make a realistic judgment of the world. So here comes that anxiety again. So I can get you to go and move and find out more things. Maybe I want you to touch more things. Maybe I want more smells, tastes, sounds, all of those different things. The more you move, as I said before, the more likely you are going to encounter different things that might seem to help. And this is where one of the things with that usually gets recommended to people with therapy, especially, is the idea of when we're having huge amounts of anxiety. Sometimes they tell you to go through like the list of, find 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch. And going through the senses like that is a good way of just kind of doing a roll call for each sense and just making sure that they're actually picking up information in the right way. But I would extend this further to when it comes to that feeling of anxiety. Sometimes the best solution is not just to engage in like movements, so just go for a run or something might be helpful, but go for a wide range of like sensory rich activities could be an even better shout. So do things that involve lots of touch, do things that involve lots of smell, do things that involve tasting different things, hearing different things, seeing different things, do things that involve like different types of movement. So maybe it's like deep pressure or like light touch, or maybe it's something interacting with the environment, throwing and catching things. Just keep switching the task up until you find something that makes you feel more comfortable, calm, or just less aware of the anxious state in the first place. And when you find those things, sometimes they can be a window into, which of these senses is actually craving more information. And then based on that, if you find that specific lights or going to watch a movie or something is really beneficial, and it's like, oh, cool. Well, what's going on there? Is it sight and sound? If you get a lot of relief from cooking, then maybe it's smell and taste, or maybe it's like work with your hands and things like that. that can be particularly beneficial, and you have more information to go on to decide, like, it's not just going to be, I need to get into gear, get into action and move. Actually, now I've got a more specific direction that I want to move into. And that takes me into the third strategy that gets used quite often. One of the things that you notice with anxiety is that you have this tendency to feel it not just in your head, but almost the entire way down your trunk and into your gut. Um, there are some reasons that this might be the case as well. So, when it comes to the body having like a uncontrollable urge to move, very often that is something to do with the digestive processes, or just the fuel supply to the body in the first place. So, in order to move effectively, we require glucose and oxygen. So, glucose, basically sugar from our food. We need oxygen from the air that we're going to breathe in. And then we're going to have all the food that we eat that's providing us fuel eventually needs digested, broken down. The good stuff gets absorbed into the cells. The waste products um, basically need to be excreted, and some of them also need to be broken down further in order to be able to do that. One of the things that we require for all of this to be able to happen is a really good flow of blood. Okay, so our circulatory system is the thing that's going to be doing an awful lot of this work. When we take glucose into our stomachs and when we take oxygen into our lungs, the bloodstream is how all of that fuel gets delivered and distributed to all of our cells. The same thing goes for the nutrients when it comes to uh, all of the other stuff that's been absorbed through the intestines. And then the same thing also goes for the things outside the circulatory system. So when we're breaking down waste products, a lot of that goes into another system called the lymphatic system. That's like basically like if you imagine another set of blood vessels, but instead of blood, it's pretty much just water. And all of these extra toxins, as they're getting broken down, they're then getting dissolved in the water, and that gets pumped all the way around your body up to your chest. And that helps then pump it through your bloodstream out into your bladder. For all of those things to work well, we need your bloodstream or your circulatory system to be distributing the fuel at the right rate. So, if you are not breathing well, if you are hyperventilating in to some degree, which a lot of us are these days, you're going to find that there's a lot more oxygen in your bloodstream. And so your brain says, okay, cool, we need to pump this faster to get it to more cells. But the cells, when the fuel gets there, says, hey, we don't need any more. So again, your brain says, well, how are we going to get rid of some of this fuel? We need to get you moving. And again, that kind of feeling of anxiety is what builds up. Same thing can be with glucose. You know, if we've got too much fuel in the tank, sometimes it's going to get stored as fat. Other times, we're going to find that the brain just wants us to move it off. And then when it comes to breaking down the waste products, the movement side of things actually becomes even more important, because for your circulatory system, at least you've got your heart, which pumps everything around the body. The lymphatic system, which is the one that deals with breaking down all the waste products, doesn't really have its own pump. It actually uses movement from the muscles to pump everything around that system. And so if you're not moving enough, if you're not getting enough kind of aerobic exercise, then you're probably going to find that actually some of these lymphatic vessels are going to start to become a little bit stagnant, because they can't flush the toxins or waste products out of that area of the body, and they just kind of get stuck and build up there. And again, that's where anxiety and the urge to move is actually going to be a really good way to get you to start moving, even though there's not a physical task or problem you need to accomplish. The more that you just start moving, the better it actually is going to be. And in those instances, some kind of cardiovascular exercise is going to be one of the best ways to deal with it on your own. The other thing I would usually say to people is when we're dealing with anxiety, um, focusing on your breathing, especially, can be a really good way to manage that because it's going to change the function of the circulatory system. It can get the heart rate to increase or decrease depending on what we need. And very often, when I'm dealing with somebody who's got persistent anxiety, it keeps coming back. I really want to look at how they're breathing to see if we can do it in a more efficient way. We've actually got a video on our channel. Our top performing video is actually on bag breathing. So where you breathe into a plastic bag or a paper bag to help reduce anxiety when you get like a strong anxiety attack. That is literally there. The way it works is that it's going to stop so much oxygen getting into your bloodstream. It's going to cause more carbon dioxide to build up in your bloodstream. That has like a relaxing effect on your body. It widens the blood vessels and things like that. But it also means you now don't have this huge buildup of oxygen that you need to get pumped through the system. So those are the kind of three most common physical things that we look at when we deal with anxiety. As I said, if this is something that you're dealing with, it could be worth chatting further. So do feel free to email at info@rewirend.com, or you can follow RewireND on Instagram. You can send us a message, or there are links below to book in for a session if that's something that you might want to do. As I said already, if you try out your balance. You know, if your balance turns out to be shocking with your eyes closed, you might not even necessarily need to book in a session. I would encourage you to look at the Neuroban course, or just figure out another way that you can work on training your balance, because there's going to be quite a lot of benefits when it comes to balance and anxiety, even if it's not the kind of big main issue that you're dealing with. So I hope that at least some of that was useful. As I said, send me an email, leave me a comment if you got any questions about any of this, and do check out if you're dealing with any other issues. This Rewire Guide playlist is just going to grow every week with more and more common issues and complaints that I encounter people dealing with.